The presenting sponsor of Andrew Talks to Chefs is Mies. Mies is the chef-created recipe operating system that makes your professional kitchen life easier with unprecedented tools for recording, scaling, analyzing, costing, and teaching recipes, much of it at the press of a virtual button. Learn more at getmees.com/Andrew. That's GETMees.com/Andrew. Episode of Andrew Talks to Chefs is supported in part by S.Pellegrino Sparkling Natural Mineral Water. For the past 125 years, S.Pellegrino has supported the art of fine dining in all of its ever-changing forms and nurtured the next generation of chefs through resources and mentorship. To learn more, visit sanpellegrino.com.
I'm Massimo Bottura.
This is Amanda Cohen.
This is David Kinch.
This is Mike Anthony.
This is Hooni Kim.
This is Amanda Freitag.
This is Richard Blaze.
This is Paul Kahn.
This is Curtis Stone.
This is Stephen Harris.
This is Missy Robbins.
And you're listening to Andrew Talks to Chefs.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show. This is Andrew Talks to Chefs. I am your host, Andrew Friedman, and I hope all of you out there are doing well. We have a special episode for you today. It's our first live show that we've done in a while, and if you know me, and if you know this program, then you know I love a live show. There's nothing I enjoy more in the world of podcasting than getting out there and doing it in front of a live audience. And that's what we did at the inaugural Cookbook Week, which took place about 2 weeks ago in San Francisco. It was a wonderful multi-day event. It was put on by Brian Hogan Stewart, Jody Liano, and Leslie Jonath. And it was several days worth of talks, signings, collaborative dinners. I attended one of the dinners actually at Foreign Cinema. They collaborated with the good folks at Diaspora Spice Company, and it was awesome. There was also a wonderful event called Head Notes Live, in which a series of people, usually it was just one, but sometimes it was more than one, gave basically a talk, a monologue, kind of similar to what happens at the Moth, if you're familiar with that, although shorter presentations than that. And they were very personal talks that were centered around food, right? Very much like a Head Note brought to life, Head Notes Live. That's kind of the signature event of Cookbook Week, although there were also signings, other events, Meet the Author events, again, collaborative dinners. And there was what we did on the last night of Cookbook Week, or I should say the last afternoon of Cookbook Week. And I will explain that in 1 second. But before I do, there is some news that I want to share. It is about one of our promotional partners, and it is directed to our young listeners out there. The S.Pellegrino Young Chef Academy competition is now open for applicants. It is a global platform for chefs under 30 designed to identify and support the future leaders of gastronomy. The competition connects emerging culinary talent with leading chefs and industry mentors, providing access to the highest levels of the international gastronomic community. From now through June, chefs are invited to apply by submitting a signature dish that expresses their personal vision, technical skill, and creativity. Are you the right person for this? Well, let's find out. There's 3 main criteria. You have to be under 30. That's an easy one to figure out. You have to work for at least 1 year as an executive chef, chef de cuisine, sous chef, chef de partie, or commis chef, but that year does not have to have taken place at the same restaurant. And the third criteria is that you have to be currently employed. That's also a fairly easy one to figure out. Actually, the middle one's pretty easy too. Anyway, I have been around the North American/US part of this competition for almost a decade now. And I have to say, I think it's a wonderful event. I think it's a great program. The mentors they bring in to spend time with the chef candidates are fantastic. The event is very well and very professionally produced, and it's a great chance to meet some of your peers. It's a great chance to show what you can do, and should you win, it's an amazing opportunity to do that on the world stage at the global finals that take place the following year. So I would say give it a look. please, I highly recommend it. There are links to more information and a direct link to the application page in the show notes for today's episode. Getting back to Cookbook Week, we did our live show at Civic Kitchen, which was a very cool space in San Francisco. I should say that we were the warm-up act, or I'm not sure if we were technically the warm-up act, but we went first. The second event, what I thought of as the main event, was the wonderful Michele Norris, who has a podcast called Your Mama's Kitchen, which you all should know. And if you don't know it, I will link to that as well in today's show notes. But Michele and her guests went after me and my guests. And Michele hosted Head Notes Live, and did a great job there as well. I really enjoyed meeting her. I think we're going to keep in touch. We talked about that anyway. We'll see how that goes. So for our live show, we decided to focus on Forgotten Classics, and that is Forgotten Classic Cookbooks, of course, because it was Cookbook Week. And I asked two people who I've wanted to have on this show forever to do it with me. I was so happy they said yes, because like everyone else who knows them, I'm just hugely fond of them. And that is Stuart Brioza and Nicole Krasinski, who are the chef owners of Statebird Provisions, The Progress, and the Anchovy Bar. Those are all in San Francisco. Those are all beloved restaurants in San Francisco. And Stuart and Nicole at this point are beloved figures in the culinary world, both in San Francisco and I would say nationally at this point. And they are also with J.J. Good, the authors of the Statebird Provisions Cookbook, which is quite wonderful. Anyway, we defined just what we mean by Forgotten Classics in the intro you're about to see that we did for the audience, so I won't belabor that here. I should mention two quick things before we get to the show. One is that the video, it's my first time on the road. We were shooting with a single iPhone. It's not the best. It's not the worst. I also employed as many tricks as I could to make it a somewhat entertaining watch and give the illusion of having multiple cameras, including one moving camera. You'll see what I mean. Anyway, if you are listening and you haven't switched over to YouTube or Spotify videos yet, I suggest you give this one a look as well, because it's fun to see Stuart and Nicole. We do superimpose the covers of the cookbooks we're talking about as we get to them. And there's an audience there. So it's kind of a fun video to watch. I suggest you do that. Also, there's one place where Stuart and I, out of an abundance of enthusiasm, start talking about a book before we actually name the title. And that book is Jacques Pepin's book, La Technique. So when we get to that, I think it'll be very clear from the context, and you will now know exactly what we are talking about. And I should also mention, just as a technicality, not all of the covers that I superimpose when we introduce each book match the covers of the books that Stuart and Nicole had, many of which were first edition. Some of the better photos online of book covers happen to be, of course, of reissues or of later editions. I went with the best looking ones because they look best on the screen. So don't be confused by that. And I think that's all you need to know to be oriented for this. So with no further ado, I'm going to get right to it. This is my conversation before a Cookbook Week audience in San Francisco with Stuart Brioza and Nicole Krasinski discussing Forgotten Cookbook Classics. Here you go.
It's gonna take a prolonged arrangement of the senses to make some sense of this.
Again, my name is Andrew Friedman. This will be a live recording of my show, Andrew Talks to Chefs. We usually do biographical interviews with chefs. Today we're talking to chefs about something else. We're talking about what we're calling Forgotten Classics in the cookbook realm. And the way that this came about was, the idea of doing a live show came up, and it was going to be at the very end of the week, and we were like, well, or I was like, what could we talk about that wouldn't be redundant after, 15 other events having to do with cookbooks? And we had this idea to do Forgotten Classics. And I asked, and these are our guests, I'd like you to welcome them, Stuart Brioza and Nicole Krasinski. This is the couple behind. Hello. You all probably know this, the couple behind Statebird Provisions, The Progress, and Anchovy Bar. and also the authors of the Statebird Provisions Cookbook, which you could buy and have signed today. And the way that we kind of are defining this, because these things are all relative, right? What somebody might consider a forgotten classic or something they never heard of could be something that somebody else knows, intimately and calls on all the time. So the three areas I would say that we decided would apply here. One is books that were considered kind of instant classics or classics shortly after they were published and for whatever reason kind of fell out of availability or to the public consciousness. Another would be books that Stuart and Nicole think should have been classics, but never made it there for whatever reason. And then the last category I would say is personal classics, books that were, for very personal reasons, touchstones. So we're going to get into all of that. We will take questions in the last several minutes. I'll just mention, just for sound purposes, we're not going to have a mic in the audience, so I will repeat the questions so that people can hear it when the show airs. And then we'll have at it. So with that said, Nicole, why don't we start with you?
Great.
Take your pick.
We'll start with the one that I think is was the most classic for me, which is Claudia Fleming's The Last Course. How many of you have this book? A couple? Yeah?
No.
Well, for those of you who don't, there was a period of time when it would cost you $500 on eBay to get this book. So I've never seen that happen before. Claudia Fleming was the pastry chef at Gramercy Tavern, and in my mind, the first to really put together a cookbook for restaurant pastry chefs. There's this amazing section in the back that kind of has these beautiful plated desserts that were so simple compared to what else was being produced at the time. This book was published in 2001, and I became a pastry chef that very same year. So you can imagine, I was like, oh my God, here's my handbook, because I was teaching myself how to become a pastry chef. So she was right next to me the whole time.
Can you just speak to the, when that book came out, when you first became familiar with it? I mean, to me, one of the things about Claudia's desserts were that they were American desserts, largely, right? They called on a lot of classical technique, but there were ingredients, flavors, references to classic desserts that were American. How big a factor was that, do you think, in addition to everything you just mentioned, for your appreciation of the book at the time, or for it seeming important or exciting at the time?
Well, I think I probably didn't think about it in those terms at the time, but I was a pastry chef at a town in northern Michigan. The town had a population of, I think, 398. So it's kind of as American as you can get. So it also would have been really appropriate for like, okay, how can I tap into like my need to be creative as a 25-year-old pastry chef and also cater to the demographic that was eating there. So I think that's really, now reflecting on it.
Great.
Peach pie.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cobbler. Yep.
All right, Stuart, do you want to start with Chef Pepin at the top?
Yeah, I think so. This was actually, this is a very classic book, and I just love the condition it's in. It just makes me happy to pull this off my shelf. For me, this was actually the first cookbook that I was introduced to when I started cooking at 16 years old. And the restaurant I was at kind of assembled like an apprenticeship program for me where, one day a week I wouldn't go to school. I wouldn't go to high school. I would just go and work in the restaurant and, start at 7 a.m., but I'd be working right next to the chef, butchering chicken and duck and learning some very basic techniques. Of course, I was curious and I would ask questions as I would go, but not from I want to be a chef, but just sort of trying to understand further. And the chef would never answer the question. But what he would do is send me home with books. And this was the first book that he sent me home with from his collection. And he would write the question, whatever it was, like, what does curing mean, right? And he'd write it on the kitchen whiteboard, right, above all the must order, duck fat, and for the rest of the cooks to see, right? So now the pressure was on, but he would give me the resources to go home and do the hard work. And so I would look up in the cookbooks. And, obviously what I really love about this, of course, I flip right to the, breaking down a chicken, is I love the black and white photos, and it is very step-by-step, photos. I'm sure you've all seen these. These are kind of classic, but you'll never see this in a cookbook again, right? Like this is, and it could be mimicked, but it would be so clearly a Jacques Pepin, ripoff. And I just love, they're just detailed. I mean, everything from, pull the insides out, all the entrails should come. Like, who talks like this, And, I love that. But that was culinary conversation. And honestly, this book, this is going to sound really funny, but, I didn't know that meat was actually muscle when I was 16 years old. I didn't know that it's just like meat was meat, right? Like you don't actually think of it as like a bicep or something, or a shank, a calf, right? It's like, so there was a lot that came out of this book that was like also just basic anatomy, right? That I was learning, about my young carnivoristic self.
There's two things that come to mind for me about well, actually three things. One is I actually took the course. There was a course at what used to be the French Culinary Institute in New York, and then it became part of the Institute of Culinary, or the International Culinary Center. And the French Culinary Institute became part of that. But the basic course at that school was La Technique, and it was actually based
on this book.
Of
course, it's a syllabus. This is you can really learn how to. You can learn your way around a kitchen.
Absolutely.
With this book.
Yeah. Another thing is, I feel like the reason, weirdly, that it's not talked about more today, I think one reason is that Jacques has kept putting out books.
Sure.
The Apprentice is considered one of the great chef memoirs that's ever been done, and now he's doing all these books with his paintings, and I kind of feel like it's just gotten pushed back to like another time.
For me, I have never even seen those books. Like I just can't. It's La Technique, and then he followed up with two other in the series, which was La Méthode and La Practice, right? So the 3-part series, and it just goes deeper and deeper into these like really great black and white step-by-step pictures, and I just think that they're just the best. They're just the best.
The other thing, we were talking the other day, like I feel like when you just showed those step-by-steps, right, you can kind of see where the internet has just chipped away at things we used to find in books, right? Like that, like now you would just see a recipe online, it would say to butcher whatever, and there would be a hot, you'd hit the link, and you'll have a video that you can watch, right? Which makes that, sad to say it, but in a lot of ways that is a redundant thing to a young up-and-coming cook, or at least it's perceived as a redundancy.
It's pretty fun in our butchery at the restaurants that we're still pulling out some of these guidebooks, right? Kind of more the technical guides of, meat cuts, and we can reference on YouTube, which can be, and is a really good resource, because you can kind of pause, cut, start again. But in the butchery, we're not doing that. We're doing it along with guidebooks such as this, whether it's like Mastering Butchery or something of that sort.
I love that.
Yeah.
And you also, right, you'll occasionally you guys will assign reading out of a physical book to people on your team?
Yes, which I'm reluctant to know if they're actually opening books or if they're just going to the,
ChatGPT, right?
Chef
summary
Google,
of this book.
Chef Google or whatever.
Summary of this 400-page book.
But yes, the last two this week, and I'll just kind of pick things up in the kitchen, like, as we're doing it. Like we've got a fregola salad that we're doing at Staperd right now, and, I was kind of like, it's amazing. I know fregola. I know where it's from, and I kind of know a lot of the history of it, and because I kind of, that's if you're going to put it on the menu, you should know, right? And I asked my cooks, and they were just sort of blank. And I said, all right, Sophie, you're on. In 2 days, I want you to report on Fregola and just give us a background. And she loved it, and she nailed it, right? She came back, and she had no notes. She just read through. She's got one of these great minds that just sort of, really recited what she learned. And she's like, all right, what's next, chef? And then, one of our young cooks who was piping financiers for the duck liver mousse that we do at State Bird, I was like, all right, do you know what that is? Do you know what financier is? And he goes, no, I'm not familiar with it. Great, that's your homework. Come back. And so I'm kind of trying to bring back some of that I was challenged with as a young cook, because I look at this is 35 years later, and I'm still I can remember it like it was yesterday, and how important those little lessons of go home and do the work. I'm not going to feed you all the answers, So.
Great, thank you. Nicole, what's next up for you?
Next up is this, also another book with no cover, because that's how much I loved it, In the Sweet Kitchen. So this is Regan Daly. She was a pastry chef, another restaurant pastry chef. This one was published in 2000, so you can see there's a theme, in Toronto. And what I really love about this book, it's so big, and there's so much information just about individual ingredients, but then she has this flavor pairing section that goes through an ingredient, and and it's falling apart.
We hurt the things we love.
Yeah, what goes with that ingredient? So, you're a pastry chef at a restaurant. It's really all about the flavor combinations and introducing interesting textures to that. That's really what dessert is all about. And so you're, Saturday night, you have to change something tomorrow, and you're like, oh my God, I can't think of anything. It's a blackberry dessert. So you go to this book, and you're like, okay, what does Regan say? And then it gets the wheels turning. So I really appreciated that as I was learning and up and coming. And also what I would say about these two books is that the recipes are really well tested, and for pastries that's so important. You don't want to spend all this time making it to learn it doesn't work. I have many of those books as well that have beautiful pictures, and then you try and replicate it and it's a disaster. And so I really love that they put the time in to make sure that they would work. So as I'm testing them for my own kitchen, I'm like, okay, this is, I know it's going to be a solid recipe, and I'm not going to waste my time or money or ingredients.
Is that a book that you feel a lot of contemporaries of yours also have? Because I don't hear it come up much at all.
No, I think it goes back to being in northern Michigan, and we went to Toronto. That was sort of our zone, and I remember hearing about her and reading about her. Really kind of pre-internet time. It was just word of mouth, who else is out there sort of doing what I had just started doing. And so I discovered her, and she also seemed to really run a very tight ship and respectful kitchen. And I heard great things about her as a pastry chef. And so that was sort of you read the recipes, and it's not just the dish that you're reading, but you're kind of learning the philosophy of that person.
What's so interesting to me, that little thing you mentioned, almost like a footnote about the flavor pairings, right? Dornenberg and Page's book, The Flavor Bible, there's a whole generation of chefs. I'm sure people are still calling on it, but 10, 15 years ago, every aspiring chef had that. It's if they were sous chef who got to do specials sometimes, that was how they would get a lot of their ideas. Yep. And this predates that by quite a long time. Yep. And I would imagine that had to be such a treasure trove when you discovered that.
Oh, yeah.
The Flavor Bible for a lot of people was the first of its kind.
Yeah, and also Gray Coons' cookbook. I remember looking through
Elements
his
of Taste
book and getting a lot of that sort of saying oh, that goes with that.
Yeah, I love that. I don't know if everyone loves that book, but I think it's one of the most successful capturing of how a chef thinks. The way they broke the book up by different types of flavors.
Yep.
I thought was brilliant.
Agreed. Yeah.
I don't know how many people pull out a cookbook and say, I want to eat something oceanic tonight, but I appreciated it. Hey everybody, Andrew here. I want to encourage you to check out our presenting sponsor, Mies. Not because they're our sponsor, but because Mies exists to make your kitchen life easier. Mies is the chef-created recipe operating system for culinary professionals. What that means is that Mies is a virtual place to house all of your recipes, and just as importantly, it enables you to derive all kinds of information from them: food costs, allergen data, yield loss, unit conversions, and nutritional breakdowns, and also to scale them up or down, and even to cost them, and to do most of that at the press of a virtual button. Mies is also a teaching tool that empowers you to incorporate how-to photos and videos to illustrate individual recipe steps and techniques, which is especially useful and time-saving for multi-unit organizations. The basic version of Mies is free for the entire culinary industry. Upgrade to premium and let Mies make your entire business more efficient and centralized. Train and onboard team members, manage production, and even process invoices. Seriously, if you work with recipes in the pro kitchen or bar, Mies was built for you and will make your entire restaurant's or company's kitchen life easier. And as a listener of Andrew Talks to Chefs, receive 25 free recipe uploads and breakdowns on your new Mies account by signing up today. Learn more at GetMeez, that's GetMeez.com/Andrew. Simply click through via the link on the episode description for today's show. All right, Stuart, what do you got?
My next here. Okay, so this book, Flatbreads and Flavors. It's Jeffrey Alford and Naomi DeGuide. And if you have ever seen, this is their first book together, and they've gone off to do, was it sour and salty? And,
Hot, sour, salty,
yeah,
sweet.
Thank you. All right. And Burmese, there was a Burmese cookbook that she wrote that was separate. But, you know, I was introduced to this book from one of my chef instructors when I was at the CIA. And what I loved about it is that it's the core premise of the book is that it's a flatbread in a village or a region, right? And then it was all the supporting dishes, right, that sort of make up that flatbread's importance. And but when you read through this, it's like a travel log, right? It's this kind of, you know, it just takes you to what food really is, right? When we travel, we're looking for those little authentic experiences in food, and we do. I mean, I personally love all the little breads, right? I mean, when I'm traveling, bread is probably the most important ingredient, and you really do see it. And the fact, I just thought it was such a brilliant concept of building a recipe book around flatbreads in particular villages. So I haven't actually opened this in a little while, so I'm kind of curious what I've got bookmarked. Okay, so like Tibetan barley skillet bread, right? Amdapali, you know, and they just go into, they'll talk about the bread, and then, you know, Tibetan dried meat, like what you would be eating with this bread, you know, butter, cheese, and yogurt, right? These are the core ingredients that go into it, you know, and then they'll go into a different bread. So what else do I have here? Oh, here we go. Lacy coconut milk pancakes, roti, I hope I'm saying this right, jala, from Penang. You know, and so essentially all the recipes are like, they don't work. I will say that. You know, they're all some sort of ratio of flour and water and fat, right? And what I found is that, like, they don't work as good as you've had it when you're in that area, right? Like, you're like, okay, like in my home kitchen in San Francisco to make a roti, like, okay, where's the 110 degrees and the humidity that's really relaxing the dough? And you start to see them flipping the dough, and you're like, how can they flip it? Well, my kitchen, it just doesn't get like humid enough and hot enough. So, you really, and this is kind of the beauty of cookbooks. When the recipes don't work, they force you into traveling to that place to actually enjoy it and truly experience it educated, right? Because you're like, oh, I know this roti jala, like I'm going to go and I know about this. I'm going to seek this out when I'm in this region. But it is kind of a global thing. So I think that cookbooks offer that sense of adventure, that they take you to a place in your mind where you can kind of just like mind surf and mind travel, and you find inspiration through that. And we have, again, we as chefs take the core spirit of a recipe, and then how do we make it work for our particular place and the ingredients and the flours and the fats and the humidity. So we have to make adjustments to it. And so it's been a great sense of it.
The State Bird Classic, burrata,
The garlic bread.
the garlic bread with burrata, it started in that book. It started as one of those recipes that didn't work. And so Stuart and I were like, okay, this isn't as delicious as we want it to be. What do we do? So it went through 4, 5, 7 iterations until we got it.
Yeah. So true. So there you go.
So let's just talk for a second.
Let's go.
When you were just talking about, actually, the thing that really brought it home for me was when you talked about the recipes not working, right? There's something that's, and I always say things change, that's normal, it's just the way it is, but there is something that's really been lost with how much we now get from the internet through videos. One of the things I think with books, right? Like you now, it's very hard to go to a restaurant now if you're like a food-oriented person and be surprised. Because you can, before you even get there, you can see the menu online. You can watch a video on Eater. You've kind of been there already. You know what the dishes that you should order. It's very hard for anything to catch you off guard, right? I remember years ago, David Waltuck, who was the chef at Chanterelle, had heard about a seafood sausage that they did, I think at Talavant and in France. But he just read about it. There was no picture. It wasn't described in great detail. And then the one thing that was on the menu at Chanterelle for the whole 30 years it was around was a seafood sausage with beurre blanc, right? So he got the idea from reading that, but it was just an outline, right? And I feel like with cookbooks, whether you're reading a recipe that you haven't cooked yet, or whether you're reading about a place that you haven't been to yet, there is a certain amount of visualizing that your brain has to do. And I would think as cooks and as chefs, that gap is a really valuable thing where there's a place for your own ideas to kind of come into play between what you've read, what it inspired in you, and then what you might try.
It's like to what Nicole said about like the flavor combinations, it just gets the wheels turning, right? And then, you also have a particular palate for how you like to cook. You also know your kitchen, the execution. There's so many other roles that, like creating a dish in a restaurant, play that get to the end result. And then of course, like, can you remake it over and over and over again, right?
Sure.
So, but I think like cookbooks, they're a voyage, right? They take you somewhere. And they take you either inside the mind of a chef, or they take you, to a place, if you're looking to expand your culinary repertoire, right? Like you kind of go to some core recipes of a particular destination, and then you're like, all right, how many ingredients can I have on hand? It's a fascinating thing, the way cookbooks play a role.
Yeah, Alfred Portale, who used to have the Gotham Bar and Grill in New York, there's a line in the Gotham Bar and Grill cookbook, great food is an adventure. And it's true.
It sure is.
And a history lesson,
it sure
often.
Is. Yeah.
How do you guys find, Nicole, maybe you could start with this one, but how do you find your younger cooks are using or not using cookbooks?
I would say they're not really using cookbooks. I can't say that 100%, but I do feel like the go-to is just the World Wide Web, looking on there. And We used to have a giant library at the restaurant with all of our cookbooks that we would lend out, and sometimes we would get them back and sometimes we wouldn't. And we ended up removing that because it just wasn't really getting utilized in the way that seemed to necessitate it being there. But I've been trying to bring in some more cookbooks into my kitchen. I have an up-and-coming pastry sous chef, and she's curious and has some really good ideas, but I feel like she could benefit from like sitting down after her shift and just looking through the book instead of trying to find something online.
Yeah, just getting lost in there. Yeah. Okay, please, Nicole, let's talk about your third selection.
Okay.
And you kind of mentioned it in passing a minute ago, but I don't know if everyone got it. We were talking before when you came in today, and you said, I looked, all three of these books were published in 2000. So can you just talk about where you were in your life and career in 2000? Because that can't just be a coincidence
No.
that these three books.
So in 2000, I moved up to Northern Michigan, like I mentioned, I moved up there to be a pastry assistant and then quickly got thrown into the role as the pastry chef. Stuart was the chef there. So these are like the seminal, I really was teaching myself, and so these were my teachers with me in my kitchen. Thankfully, I had a kitchen in the back of the restaurant, and I was by myself, so nobody could see the things that got tossed into the garbage that weren't working. But I learned a lot of lessons, and this is maybe the most surprising of all, and I often have to remind myself that this was really an awesome book for me at the time. And look, he came to State Board and signed it for me. Like 20 years later.
We should say this was not many years, but this was pre-Hell's Kitchen.
Yeah, this was 2000.
Yeah.
So this one in particular, I used a lot of these when I was the pastry chef at Rubicon here in San Francisco. This one is just like one of the most amazing, delicious flavors that you'll ever have. And I don't serve bananas in my kitchen anymore, as you can imagine, because we have so many other fruits in California. But back when I did, the caramel with rum and star anise and lime juice is just this magical, like, you really don't want to talk to anyone while you're eating that dessert. And then the other thing that he has in here is just a lot of like, okay, syrups. Let's talk about syrups. Here are all these different syrups you can make, like breaking things down and giving you lots of ideas and not necessarily telling you how to combine them or what to put with them, but just sort of like building your larder as a pastry chef.
I think it's a good testament to don't judge a book by its cover or who's on the cover, right?
Well,
I mean, he was a very accomplished chef, you know, in the 90s, and, you know, was really building himself up, and then he got thrown into the TV world, but he, which changed his career, but he was a very well-respected in the chef community in the 90s. So that book is pretty great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Also funny that the foreword was written by Anthony Bourdain, who eventually came not to be the biggest fan of Gordon Ramsay.
Yeah.
So that's also kind of a funny kind of footnote. The other thing that just popped into my head, I haven't thought of it in forever, but I would bet at least half of these books, maybe. It used to be a common thing when you were just talking about sourcing and building a larder. There used to be a list, mail order sources.
Oh, yeah.
That was the thing in the back of a book, right? Because if you put in a book, if you put like so-and-so, you know, like some kind of a tinned something that, you know, maybe was imported, your editor was like, where are people going to get this, right? Because we didn't have
I bet J.B. Prince is in all of these.
Right, right, for all the cookware.
Yeah, for all the cookware, yeah.
But that's another thing that is kind of obsolete now.
Yeah.
A quick note of thanks to one of our promotional partners, S.Pellegrino Sparkling Natural Mineral Water. For the past 125 years, S.Pellegrino has supported the art of fine dining in all of its ever-changing forms and nurtured the next generation of chefs through resources and mentorship. To learn more, visit sanpellegrino.com.
All right. Well, this here, you guys seen this guy before?
Who knows this person?
I loved it because Andrew didn't know who he was.
I didn't know who it was.
This is Hugh Fernley Whittingstall. If anything, it's fun to say his name. You know, Hugh Fernley Whittingstall, he actually is, I think he's like a Cambridge grad, if I'm right. You know, like very well educated, started his career, I think he was like 6 months in the River Cafe, is that it, in London? The River Cafe, and then he just sort of went into, like, he's a great personality. So this is an example of somebody who's as seen on Channel 4, you know, Channel 4 BBC, I guess. But he's a British chef, and he had a series called The River Cottage. And what I really loved about this series was that the series was about him sort of moving to the countryside from London, and through this, like, he started, it was like he built this whole ecosystem through every episode, right? And it was like, all right, I'm moving to this country cottage, and it had, you know, tulips and flowers and da-da-da-da. And he goes, first order is rip out all the tulips and the flowers, and we're going to add some nutrients, and we're going to grow some food, right? So his whole concept is that he's going to move to the country, and then he's going to start his own garden, and he's going to start to live off of this garden. And as it sort of grew, he would add he'd add chickens, right? And then, but he would go and talk to a local chicken farmer, and he'd buy, you know, little chicks and how to build a chicken house. And so he developed this relationship. And then it was like he'd add a pig, and he'd go and, you know, to the finest, a very classic, you know, English pig that he would bring back. And it was, you know, like a Berkshire pig. And he'd bring them back from little piglets, and he'd set up this like little area for them to live. And, you know, every episode was like the next step of him adding to his kind of farm larder, right? By adding more ingredients, more, you know, more relationships, and he'd learn, and he would, you know, as each of these would continue, he would take like that pig when it came to the time to take it to the abattoir and you know, move on to the next phase of its life. He would invite that pig farmer who initially gave him, you know, the instruction of how to raise a pig, and like, here's what I did with my pig. You know, it was just this really cool thing. So it was at a time where I felt like it was really filling my cup to watch this whole community come together around food and growing food. He's very entertaining, he's very intelligent, and he wrote this book, The River Cottage Meat Cookbook. And since then, he's really grown it. So I would say, I wouldn't say I have, look, of course, pork and bacon, right? Like, that's a great chapter. But, you know, I wouldn't say I have many heroes, but he is definitely like food heroes. He is one. And I got the great opportunity to cook for him when he was in town on book tour. And Aaron Wayner, who is the head of 10 Speed, called me up and said, hey, can you make room for Hugh and his wife? And I was like, yeah, I can do that. Like, are you kidding? And I was, you know, it was early days State Bird, and I was very much right on the line and right there, like just eyeball to eyeball, and we were just hitting it off, and we became like pen pals, and we write to each other periodically. And he ended up, I asked him if he would write a blurb for the State Bird cookbook, and he said yes. And so that was a really special moment. But I love this book. And has anybody seen the River Cottage series? You've seen it? Okay, so Jody, you know that you understand this like ecosystem that he created. And it's also in England, so it's like a lot of historical references and castles with pigeons and, you know, like, and pigeon hunters and, you know, just like, I mean, things that you just can't fathom. And I just love, again, this growing ecosystem. He started off with just a simple idea, ripping out the tulip bed. Sorry, I know I'm long-winded there, but I love this. I encourage you, read the books. But also maybe go and, you know, YouTube it or something. I guess it's on YouTube now. At the time, you had to pirate it. And Rubicon had just closed, and I was feeling a little, you know, depleted. And like I said earlier, it filled my cup, right? It really kind of gave me, like, how it showed me how important food and community is. And in the book, he really talks about that too. It's part of the dialogue, right? It's not just food. It's so much. It's this ecosystem that we live with.
I wasn't trying to hurry you along.
Okay.
I just want to make sure we leave time for questions.
Great.
And I don't wear a watch anymore. Something else that's gone now. Was there anything else you wanted to say about?
No.
Okay.
This is it.
All right. So, Nicole, let's start with you. I'd love to hear both your thoughts on this. It was interesting hearing you both talk about literally making things out of these books, because so many chefs I know, they'll go in New York, it's Kitchen Arts and Letters, here it might be Omnivore, wherever you go. And they'll come out with a stack of books with no intention ever of really reading those books or cooking out of them. They're sources of ideas for them, right? And not something that they're going to lift necessarily, but a combination that's there, or a presentation flourish, or like that. At this point in your career, right? What is it that makes a book, and it could be more than one thing, but what makes a cookbook worthwhile to you to have?
Well, I was just at Omnivore, and I did purchase some books, and one of them was a woman from Copenhagen, and it's all desserts, and I guess she's a big Instagram personality. I didn't even know this. I just really loved the design of the book and the way it was laid out, and then again, the combinations of flavors. I felt like she had been inside my brain, and because I was like, these are things that I've done, but slightly different, and I feel like, the longer you do this, you're always looking for inspiration. And so I felt like it would be that's the one I picked out for my pastry sous chef to help her, because it's very aligned with what we do, but new and interesting things. And I do, as a pastry chef, I actually cook out of cookbooks when I'm cooking savory dishes. So we're doing a cookbook event at Anchovy Bar, and we got the book ahead of time, and I'm having some people over tomorrow, and I'm like, I'm going to make something out of this book. And it's been so fun to read it, because I can really hear the chef's voice, and she's so funny. She's like, just relax and pick those peas. Like, you really get this sense of who she is and how much she loves cooking. And it's like, because it can be intimidating, right? Or it can feel like, oh my God, this is going to take me forever. But it's like, you know what, just pick those peas. It's going to be worth it.
Stuart?
Yeah, obviously, kind of like how I buy wine, right? Like if the label's really cool, I'm like, oh, this is good, right? Does anybody else do that?
That makes
too?
me feel so much better.
You go in, you're like, oh, this is so neat, and then you buy it, and you're like, oh, this is good. But cookbooks too, like design first, usually like the subject matter. I do tend to buy books of places I'm unfamiliar with that cuisine. But sometimes I'll flip through and I just see, I remember I bought this one a few years ago. It was George Lang's Hungry, Cooking of Hungry. And I flipped open and it's just like, go figure, I would open it to this and it was like quail soup. And I was like, how ironic. But I was also like, quail soup, like what is that? So curiosity. And then I'm like, well, if that's in here, I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of other things that are going to be really kind of oddly interesting, right? And and sometimes, I picked up a book on tempura at Omnivore recently, and I was like, I think I have a pretty good tempura, but there's a good, it's nice to read a book and like kind of somebody who's like really focused on it, and maybe I can fine-tune my recipe, because I think that it's important to do that as a chef, is to take the things that you've loved making and maybe kind of look at them through the current lens. And that's so many different things contribute to that current lens. And it's nice to kind of calibrate yourself and also just feel like you're learning and still improving with slight variation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have time for some questions. Are there any questions for Stuart and Nicole? None. Yes, one. I forgot to plant a question. It's a rookie mistake.
So you guys wrote a beautiful book. As you sat down to do that and write your proposal, were there books you had in the back of your mind that made you feel like, I would love to emulate this or take inspiration from that? Or did you set out to do something that was
to start?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So cookbooks, there was a time, I mean, obviously when Nicole and I, we lived in the Midwest for a number of years, and there was early days of when we were, just kind of cooking in kitchens, and we would just read, like we had Mondays off, we would, pick up lots of used books, and we would just have a stack of books at home. So Monday mornings would like make a big pot of coffee, we'd bookend, no pun intended, but the couch, and we'd sort of just be sitting there for hours just reading them cover to cover. And you're reading through cookbooks, and I think like the kids call it like these Easter eggs in video games or whatever. Well, like cookbooks have this too, and they're like these little jewels and gems, and it's really very they're only seen if you've got the vision, right? If you've got the X-ray glasses, meaning that you're in that zone. So depending on what you're doing, what station you're working in the kitchen, that's the vision that you're going to see. And so you're kind of going through. So I always looked at cookbooks as like there's all these little gems, these like planted seeds of ideas. And as we're reading through, I wanted our cookbook, the goal was that I wanted our cookbook to be written for that 22-year-old self of mine who was so curious and who wanted to see the secret. Like if you were willing to read through the recipe, which, I don't know if we do anymore, but if you're willing to, you're gonna see the little eggs that I've planted, these little Easter eggs that are in there, these gems. And the recipes work really well. That was a big part. Actually, Rum is sitting in the audience here. She hates that I'm calling her out. But Rum, she was a part of this cookbook, writing of the cookbook and testing and making sure that we were really documenting. And so we have it written in a way that is like, of course, the publisher wants like cups and teaspoons and tablespoons, but in kitchens, we don't work that way. It's like we work in measurements and grams, and, weights and volumes are really important to us because that's how you translate. Nobody knows what a tablespoon is supposed to look like. It's usually like the biggest spoon on the dining room table. It's not an actual tablespoon. That's a proper measurement. So that kind of thing was really important to us. But I think that that was the goal, is that we wanted to write with this idea that if you're willing to go the distance, there are some super gems in here. And other than that, it's also great. It's stapered. It's exactly what we were doing at that moment, and what we wanted the restaurant to be. So.
And I was going to talk a little bit about that because it's such a hard restaurant to capture. It's so dynamic. It's like full contact dining is what we call it. And so how do you put that into a cookbook? And so we tried to do that with all the photos of the team and the people, and just really conveying like it's made up of so many important people. And at that time, we had so many people that had been with us since day one, and so we really wanted them to be shown in this book, like they helped build up this restaurant to what it was and what it is. And so there's like funny pictures of someone doing a kickflip in the hallway because he rode his bike or his skateboard to work every day, and it was like, well, like we got to get Ian in there doing the kickflip. Like that's such an awesome moment of our day.
Day in the life. I think restaurant books should represent the restaurant, and they should be like really like they're a place in time. If it's a Stuart and Nicole cookbook, like Cooks at Home, that's a Stuart and Nicole Cooks at Home, and that's like there's not 6 recipes that are referenced to make one dish. That's like, okay, here's one pan and here we go. There's 2 of those dishes in the Statebird book that you could go out, buy the ingredients, and make the dish from start to finish in 30 minutes. Like, I look at it and I'm like, God, what a terrible book this is. But also, like, what an inspiring book it is to so many. And so I think that this is not your one-pan cookbook, right?
I mean, it's interesting because I think it's been much hard. It's become really hard to do a restaurant cookbook. I mean, there are some publishers, like the number of times someone will be pitching me someone for the show, and they're like, and their book's coming out, and it's from Fiden, and I'm like, yeah, of course it is,
Yeah.
because
Right. Yeah.
no one else would do this,
It's an art
it's like
book,
it's
right.
it's like it's an art book, or it's
Yeah.
very quirky, or it's
Yeah.
like, and it's not a house that pays terribly big advances by and large, right? They hedge their bets, but the chefs get the book they want. But there was a time when, like, if you had a decent restaurant, New York, San Francisco, LA, Chicago, you could sell a cookbook, and it would just be the so-and-so restaurant cookbook. But I just think most of them lost a lot of money, basically. Okay, any other questions here? All right, then I'll ask another question. I wonder about when you just talked about staying true to the the state bird provisions when you did the book. How do you think about that in terms of the home cook, right? Because I worked on a book like that. I mentioned the Gotham Bar and Grill before. That was the first thing I ever worked on, was the Gotham Bar and Grill
We have
cookbook.
that. I love it.
And, when we did that book, Alfred was committed to representing the dishes exactly as they were at the restaurant. And we did have all those, like, cross-references to sub-recipes, and it was a lot of work. But if you did it, you actually could kind of stick the landing, and it would taste pretty close to what was at the restaurant. And if you did it a second time, you'd nail it, right? Do you hear from readers who have, like, taken the, like we hear about these people who go nuts and, like, cook their way through Julia Child, or some people who have done, like, the El Bulli, dishes at home. That's was a big Instagram thing. What do you hear from home cooks that have taken your book? Have some of them, like, really, like, taken the challenge?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have made the ice cream sandwiches. I've heard, I have, and it's actually not that, it's a basic sabayon, which could be difficult if you haven't done it, but it's also, once you, like, go through it, and the picture, it's very step by step. I wanted to make sure that each step was shown pictorially so that it wasn't so scary, and so that one's definitely been done. And I think a lot of people have also made the peanut milk, because that's very home cook friendly.
Yeah. And I think on the savory side, like the sourdough, sauerkraut, pecorino ricotta pancakes are like I actually just sold a cookbook to a table like 3 nights ago. She's like, she was looking on her phone. I can see she was scrolling through, and it had the cookbook on it. And so I brought her over a copy, and I was like, oh, here, you can thumb through it in real time. And she goes, as long as the sauerkraut pancakes are in here, I'll buy it. And I was like, well, let me show you. And so I was like, and she bought it. I thought that was so cool. So I think that's a big one. What else? What other ones? I think the yuba alla matriciana, that's actually one that you can make very easily at home. It doesn't require a whole lot of preparation in advance. Most of these recipes start 6 weeks ago, right? So it's like, get the cabbage and salt it. Now you're going to make sauerkraut. And,
It's like planting a vegetable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that's, and the quail gets some, people will write and say, I made the quail, or they'll, I think, post it on Instagram and tag us, which is always really awesome. It feels good when people are doing it.
It's so interesting you both each went to one recipe that you remember, people, because I've definitely heard when it comes time to promote a book, publishers say, like, if we could just have one breakout, if there could just, like, the ultimate, right? I just had it a few hours ago, the zuni chicken with the bread salad, right? Like, that's a dish. Everyone knows that dish. A lot of people knew it from the restaurant, but for whatever reason, when that book came out, all of a sudden, like, everyone knew about that dish. I made it out of the book before I'd ever had it.
Oh, amazing.
At the restaurant. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
But honestly, I think one of the other things is going to other people's restaurants and seeing our, we love having cookbooks around, and when we see our book at someone's restaurant, another chef, whether we know them or not, that's so cool. And we've definitely heard from colleagues that they have the book and their team has been inspired by it. So that's another side of it that's really cool.
Awesome. All right. Anybody? Was that a hand?
Yeah.
No? Yes? Oh.
You guys have collaborated for so long in a way that is presenting things to the public, but was this writing process as a collaborative process? How was that
Just to repeat the question so we have it for the recording. The question was, you two have collaborated for a very long time. Most of that's been in the restaurant. When it came time to do the book, how did that collaboration differ from other ways that you've collaborated?
Well, we had a co-author, J.J. Good, so he sort of helped to bring it all together because we were, working on our recipes separately and kind of writing it, and then he helped to really make it one voice in the book. He's such a great guy and so easy to work with and so fun. So I think that was probably the main difference, is having that third person in that relationship with us.
Yeah, I would agree.
All right. If there are no other questions.
When you're writing this, how do you think about who it's for? Like the in-person receiving this, or who you have somebody in your mind for your experiences, or the people that you talk to every day?
So when you were writing your book, how were you thinking about who the audience for it was? Who was on the other end of this work you were creating?
Yeah, I think that, when it really started off with this simple idea that I was writing it for my 22-year-old self, or our curious minds when we were young cooks, because of there's just so much information in there and so many cool techniques. So that was really the idea. And then the second part of that is that we were writing it for the restaurant, right? It's at the end of the day, it's called State Bird Provisions, same with the restaurant name. So it's going to be a great representation of the restaurant. And, it's actually amazing how many books we sell through the restaurant right now. And that's probably our main source, right? I think it's everywhere, but it's, we sell a lot through that because people want to take a little piece of State Bird back home with them, right? And I think that's one of the real gems of restaurant cookbooks. I know when I travel and I see a restaurant that's got a cookbook, I want to take a little bit home and, maybe I'll get it signed or something of that sort. It's really special, right?
Yeah. I just had an amazing moment. I don't want to name drop, so I won't name the chef, but there's a chef in New York who just passed away a few weeks ago named Tom Valenti, who I happened to write all 3 of his cookbooks with him. And about 3 days after he died, I got a text from one of the more well-known, well-liked chefs in the United States.
You can say it.
And
you told us.
Am I supposed to say it?
You should say it.
All right. Well,
Yeah, that's
forgive
really
me if you're
special.
listening, but it was Nancy
Yeah.
Silverton.
Yeah.
Saying, how sad she was, and then saying, I can't find, like you were talking about Claudia's book before, although our book was never that popular. But I can't find Tom's first book. I'd love to have a copy of it. And that meant a lot.
How special is
that? That meant a lot. That
and that
she wanted
cares.
this remembrance of him. That was where her mind went. So.
I think that's really special.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It really was. All right. Thank you all, and please join me in thanking Nicole and Stuart and Jody and Brian and Leslie and the Cookbook Week crew. And that is our show for today. Again, my huge thanks to Stuart Brioza and Nicole Krasinski for joining me for that interview. Huge thanks to the audience that came out for it. And again, huge thanks to the entire Cookbook Week team for including us in the first ever Cookbook Week. We were honored to be there and had a great time. Please go check out Mies, the recipe operating system for culinary professionals, at getmies.com/Andrew. And our thanks, as always, to S.Pellegrino for their longstanding support of the pod. Andrew Talks to Chefs is the property and a production of Table 12 Productions Incorporated. If you'd like to support us, we ask that you do that by telling a friend about the show, posting about the show on social media, and or rating and or reviewing us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you are now watching us on YouTube, please be sure to like and subscribe. Our thanks, as always, to After School Special for our music. Please check out their album Double Barrel, Single Entendre on iTunes. Please follow us on Instagram and also on TikTok. @Chef Podcast is the handle on both platforms. Thank you for listening, and we will be back soon with another episode of Andrew Talks to Chefs.